Hi everyone, and welcome to this short tutorial showing you how I create whiskers in pastel. I'm going to use Baxter the cat to demo this, and for most of it I'm just going to be using a white pastel pencil. So I hope you enjoy this short tutorial. I'm going to also release a longer tutorial showing you how I create Baxter's eyes. Then, if you're interested in more in-depth tutorials showing you things like Baxter's fur and other parts of this painting, next month on my Patreon channel is going to be Cat Month. So there'll be lots more from this particular piece over there. I'll add links in the description below. But enjoy this tutorial all about whiskers. So let's make a start on the whiskers. You can see my photo reference in the top right, and I'm using Pastelmat Paper for this piece. This is a nice sharp white Faber Castell Pastel pencil. And so I'm using mostly white for the whiskers. I've left this entirely in real time. It took me about 10 minutes or so to create these whiskers. But the main thing that I wanted you to see from this was how I planned each whisker and then really went for it with the pastel pencil. So I've left it in real time so you can see exactly how much time I take on each whisker. I'm using white only to create the whiskers as I want them to stand out as brightly as possible. But you can see that there's a big difference between the colours on one side of Baxter the cat's face to the other side. One side's in shadow and the other side is brightly lit. So I know that when I apply this white pastel pencil over these darker greys, it will sort of mix with those greys. It will come out a little more grey coloured. And you'll see that when I use the same white pastel pencil on the sunlit side, they do come out a lot brighter. So I'm really pausing at the top of each whisker, studying the photo reference and visualising where that whisker is going to go, where it might cross over another whisker. And I don't have to get the entire whisker in one go. I can get a good bit of the curve and then come back and add that real taily end to it. But you can see that some of the whiskers curve out and downwards, and some curve out and then start coming up the ways again. So I'm really planning each whisker before I make the mark. Really taking my time and then softening some of those whiskers where they recede around the side of the cat into the shadows. Just trying to lighten my touch towards the end of the whiskers, let them tail off quite naturally. So the whisker that I was probably dreading the most are his two dally whiskers at the very top. So I take a few practice runs. I'm really planning where that whisker is going to cut the side of his face and where I'm going to end it roughly. And then it's just about taking a good clean sweep at it. And I was reasonably pleased with that one. I can live with that. I can come back in and strengthen, especially towards the base of the whiskers where they're at their thickest. But I was happy enough with the sweep of that. If it had gone terribly wrong and I had messed that one up, it is quite simple to cover over that line and go again fresh with a new line. Pastel is quite forgiving. And because I'm using Pastelmat, I can find enough of the pigment comes off the pastel pencils. If this were velour, I might be using little shards of white pastel pencil for some of the thicker parts of those whiskers. So I'm just strengthening certain ones, making them a little thicker, and also trying to get them to go into those little holes on the muzzle. Make it seem like they're really sprouting out of there. So I can use some of my darker pastel pencils just to clean up around the edges, add a bit of contrast here and there. So that's pretty much the shadow side done. After a quick sharpen of my white pastel pencil, I start on the sunlit side. If you'd like to see how I sharpen my pastel pencils, I have another video on my YouTube channel here. But these sunlit whiskers on the left side of the piece, doing the same thing, trying to get them to overlap nicely, planning ahead where each curve is going to go. And the nice thing about the whiskers over here, my soft pastel that I've used on the fur, that helps me get some extra white pigment down the length of those whiskers. I'm really dragging some of that softer white pastel out into the whisker over that background. So again, just taking my time. Sometimes I hold the pencil a bit further down the pencil. If you hold it too close to the nib, I find it's a very controlled way to hold the pencil and you can't get the looseness that you need to create nice curvy whiskers. So I tend to hold the pastel about halfway down quite often and really loosen my wrist a bit. I'm sort of making these marks with the movement of my wrist more than my fingers. Angling my hand and the pencil whatever way I need to go. And the most tricky one on this side, again, it's his dolly whiskers. So again, I take a bit of a practice run before making any marks. And I've got to admit, I do hold my breath quite often when I'm starting a whisker or something similar. So a steady hand is required. But you can always take some practice goes on another piece of paper before you've got to do the real thing. I like to just jump in and hope for the best. I know that pastel is so forgiving that I can fix any mistakes that I make. But I do hope to get them as close as possible first time. So just strengthening up a bit of the contrast behind the whiskers, brightening them a little bit in certain areas. So be sure to check out, in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to release a full tutorial here on YouTube based on Baxter's eyes, how to paint cat's eyes. And if you like those and you'd like even more in-depth tutorials, I'm going to be releasing much longer tutorials next month on my Patreon channel, showing you how to create different types of cat fur, but using Baxter as my first tutorials on cats. I find them so different to paint than dogs in particular. Their fur seems to be much thicker, and I find their eyes much trickier. So I've been looking forward to Cat Month over on Patreon. I think there's a lot you can learn from painting cats, whether they're domestic or wild. But whiskers is one of those things that's certainly tricky and also something that you don't want to mess up right at the end of your painting when you've got everything else right. So I'm just trying to flick the ends of the whiskers on the sunlit side. Just create those fine flyaway ends. I'm not too concerned about getting them exactly like the photo reference. After all, Baxter's whiskers looked completely different 2 minutes after this photo was taken, so I just want to give the effect of them, and I'm In particular, looking for any of those curves that I find very pleasing. I couldn't not put his dolly whiskers in. So I hope that you've enjoyed watching this and that you've found it helpful. Please do subscribe here on YouTube to get all my next free content, but also have a look around on some of my playlists for lots more shorter tutorials like this. Thanks for watching and happy pasteling.